On this Tuesday night, Gaza's second largest city surrounded. Israel's intensifying ground offensive as life keeps getting worse for Palestinians who have nowhere to flee. Sexual misconduct in Canada's military on the rise.
Victims are showing that they do not trust this institution.
The troubling new findings and what advocates say needs to change now. Politics and helping the unhoused, the disproportionate way federal funds are allocated for affordable housing. Let it go. After being frozen to the sea floor, a 1 trillion-ton iceberg is now on the move. And she's a soccer game changer.
I don't know what it's going to look like without her.
Christine Sinclair's teammates on her immeasurable influence beyond the pitch.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Israel's army appears to be moving into another new and deadly phase in its war on Hamas. It is pushing deeper into southern Gaza, making life increasingly perilous for people who have nowhere to go. Gaza's health ministry, run by Hamas, says nearly 16,000 people have been killed, including 6,000 children. Hospitals are severely overcrowded. There aren't enough staff or medical supplies. The UN says 80% of Gaza's population, about 1.8 million people, have now been displaced. There's nowhere for them to go. Many are in tents with nowhere to even wash their hands. Israel imposed a communications blackout across Gaza yesterday, knocking out the internet. That's now being restored. And there are reports water pumps have been set up to flood tunnels in Gaza with seawater to try to drive Hamas fighters above ground. Daniele Hamamdjian has our top story tonight and a warning. Some of the images are distressing.
Gaza's second biggest city is now a battlefield. The Israel Defense Forces say they're now encircling Khan Younis. By now, after 8 weeks of bombardment, these scenes might seem repetitive to some watching from the outside. But they're no less traumatizing for those trapped and unable to escape. They launched mortars at us at night, says this boy. We were scared and did not sleep. 6-year-old Lana Abu Safi told the man who carried her in that she was hungry and thirsty and that she wanted her mother. The UN recently called Gaza a graveyard for children. But then there are those whose parents are the ones who were killed.
What shocked me the most were the children with atrocious injuries and at the same time having lost their parents with no one looking after them.
The residents of Khan Younis, which include those who fled from the north last month, have been told to leave. Israel is dropping leaflets and telling them to go to safer ground. But according to residents, no such place now exists here. This woman is appalled by the inaction of the Arab world. The Arab leaders, she says, they're just watching and doing nothing. What Israel considers safer ground, many Gazans will tell you, has no water, no shelter, no toilets. There are no bathrooms, we cannot even wash. There is no place to bake or get bread, no market to buy food, she says. It is a completely remote area. And life in Gaza is likely about to get even worse. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met today with hostages who've just been released. They told him how Hamas dressed them in hijabs and headscarves so that Israel wouldn't detect them. That airstrikes are happening very close to where the captives are being held. One reportedly telling Netanyahu, "You claim to have intelligence, but the fact is, we were bombed." Donna.
Daniele Hamamdjian in Jerusalem. Thanks. Sexual misconduct in the Canadian military is not new. It's been a problem for decades, and now Stats Canada reports it's getting worse, or at least more people are reporting it. A StatsCan survey last year found nearly 2,000 regular force members, or 3.5%, said they were sexually assaulted. That's more than double the rate from the last survey done in 2018. Global News has broken a number of stories about sexual misconduct in the military, including in the senior ranks. Lots of promises have been made about reform. Promises that, as Abigail Bimman reports, have not led to much change.
Were you expecting this to be lower, and is it a failure that they've climbed that they've doubled.
So we are expecting to do a lot more work in this space.
Lieutenant General Jenny Carignan was tasked with changing the culture in the Canadian Armed Forces 2 years ago, a period that saw the ousting of a number of senior members over sexual misconduct scandals, a former Supreme Court justice calling the military a broken system that's a liability to the country in a wide-ranging report, and countless government promises for reform. Now, more than twice as many regular force members say they were sexually assaulted than when the last survey was done in 2018.
A lot more analysis needs to go into that before we actually determine what this raise means.
An increase in reporting is deeply concerning to us, but I think it can also be indicative of a perhaps greater confidence among victims that if they do come forward and bring forward their complaints, that they will be taken seriously.
We have clear evidence that victims are not coming forward because they don't trust the institutions. So this is a failure on all accounts.
According to the report, most people did not report incidents. The biggest reason why? They didn't think it would make a difference or they feared consequences. And in fact, 2/3 of those who did report said they faced negative consequences, anything from bullying to retaliation and reprisal.
So this is clearly a barrier. A lot of emphasis done on the complaint management system, which we are completely overhauling.
It is going to take time, and numbers like today are disappointing, but they should not take us off our course.
The message that this is a complex problem that is going to take a long time to fix is a rhetorical tool to avoid accountability.
Advocates say change in the Canadian Armed Forces has taken long enough, and for a government that has said its top priority in the military is to fix this problem, there seem to be no explanations Tuesday as to why the problem persists, other than saying it will take more time. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
The federal government is investing $71 million in nonprofit housing co-ops, which are owned and operated by the people who live in them.
As a result of a sustained lack of investment for decades, Canada now is facing a shortage of affordable housing in the ecosystem that manifests itself in a lot of very challenging ways. Now, we can change that, but not without sustained direct investment by the federal government in affordable housing.
The government is planning to build nearly 1,200 new co-ops. The rest of the money will be used to retrofit existing structures in Quebec, BC, Ontario, and New Brunswick. The need for housing in one small New Brunswick town is so acute, it has declared a local state of emergency. Not long ago, someone died in a park in St. Stephen, New Brunswick. And as Heidi Petracek explains, the declaration calls out the province for failing to address the crisis.
With winter weather already here, Canadians living outside are at risk. And now a New Brunswick town has taken extraordinary measures after tragedy.
Municipal District of St. Stephen. Emergency services were forced to respond to a fatality of a resident in a public space.
That death over the weekend prompted Council for St. Stephen, a community of 8,100, to declare a local state of emergency, blaming the province for inaction and lack of funding to tackle homelessness.
A municipality doesn't have a toolbox to do this. I don't even have a budget for this. That's not our mandate. I can't go in and take care of social services, social development, and welfare.
The New Brunswick government has fired back, stating it intends to terminate the town's declaration, saying it's only for, quote, true emergencies.
Society as a whole often sees homelessness as an urban issue.
Yet St. Stephen is not alone. Inflation, high rents, lack of public housing, and low basic incomes, she says, all adding up into crisis.
I've been to communities with 1,000 people or less in who are also finding they have, and didn't have before, are having issues with homelessness.
And other incidents have punctuated the urgency. Just last week, a New Brunswick nonprofit released a shocking video showing a man sleeping in a dumpster emptied into a garbage truck. Fortunately, he was rescued. And police in Halifax found a man dead at this encampment as well. Many agencies and shelters are at their limits, and so everyday people are now stepping in on the ground where they say governments have not. 2 citizens helped bring in these special winter tents, calling for all levels of government to come together.
If this is not resolved, people are going to die. And it's as simple as that.
We did not take this lightly.
With St. Stephen left in an apparent stalemate with the province and more than 100 unhoused, the mayor worries what will happen once winter officially arrives. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
Many municipalities are looking to the federal government to fund temporary shelters and affordable housing. David Akin has been analyzing how money from one multi-billion-dollar federal fund has been allocated over the last few years, and he found it has disproportionately gone to large urban centres. David.
Well, Donna, the federal government has several programs to help build affordable homes. One was called the Rapid Housing Initiative, or RHI. It was a $4 billion program launched during the pandemic in 2020, designed largely to get people out of crowded shelters where they might more easily catch COVID and into their own affordable housing units. Federal funds were used to build thousands of new units over the last 3 years by converting hotels or motels or quickly building modular housing units.
I think the RHI is one of the best programs in the National Housing Strategy.
A Global News analysis, though, shows that RHI funds, by and large, went to projects in large urban centers, with fewer projects funded in the country's smaller cities. That trend also had a political bias, because Conservative MPs are underrepresented in Canada's large urban cores, while New Democrats are overrepresented. Consider this. About 8% of the country is represented by a New Democrat MP, but nearly 19% of RHI funds went to NDP ridings. Meanwhile, 34% of the country has a Conservative MP, but those ridings got just 15% of the funds. As for Liberal ridings, 48% of Canadians live in those ridings, and 49% of the funding went to those ridings. The federal housing minister says that partisan skew was not intentional.
That there's not decisions taken to deliberately fund one opposition party more. It's a function of the projects that come into the fund for application that meet scoring criteria.
But that scoring criteria, the program design, introduced its own bias. More RHI money for big cities and proportionally less for smaller ones.
Homelessness exists in these rural communities, but it's not measured. And so that presents a challenge.
The geography of homelessness has changed in the past several years. When it comes to Rapid Housing Initiative, there was by design an urban bias.
And what governments cannot count or have trouble counting, governments cannot fund. And so that, the experts say, is one of the first things that needs to be done to meet this growing homelessness problem in the country's smaller municipalities. Count the homeless and quantify the problem in order to qualify for federal funding. Donna.
Okay, David Akin in Ottawa, thank you. The world's largest iceberg is on the move. Coming up, the problems this massive chunk of ice could cause. Rescuers in Indonesia have recovered 11 more bodies after Sunday's volcanic eruption on Mount Merapi. 22 people were killed. One person is still missing and 12 others are being treated in hospital. More than 50 climbers were rescued after that initial eruption, and new eruptions have since hampered rescue and recovery efforts. A record number of lobbyists who work with the fossil fuel industry are at the climate conference in Dubai. An analysis by environmental groups found more than 2,400 lobbyists with ties to the fossil fuel industry are registered for COP28. That's more than almost every country delegation this year, and nearly 4 times the number of lobbyists who registered last year. The jump could partly be due to a new requirement that attendees declare who they represent, a rule introduced by the UN after years of pressure for greater transparency. The biggest iceberg in the world is on the move for the first time in more than 3 decades. A23A, as it's known, is a massive sheet of ice that has garnered global attention as it quickly drifted beyond Antarctica and into the open ocean. Eric Sorensen explains how it got there and what it could mean.
It stretches across the horizon as far as the eye can see. Iceberg A23A. One Antarctic scientist said it feels like sailing alongside a new country, only it's a country of solid ice, and now it's on the move.
Slowly over time it would melt a bit off, and then what happened about a year ago or so is that it became buoyant enough that it actually started to float.
It was at one time a glacier sliding atop Antarctica until a massive piece broke off the ice shelf in 1986. 4,000 square kilometers, the largest iceberg in the world. It is more than 2/3 the size of Prince Edward Island. One iceberg. It was grounded for about 35 years, but this year began moving through the Weddell Sea. Just since October, satellite images show it drifting quickly beyond Antarctica into the southern Atlantic Ocean. Next stop could be the South Georgia Islands. And keep in mind, that colossal thing we can see is only the tip of the iceberg. Up to 90% of icebergs are below the surface. The biggest ones could threaten communications cables in shallow areas, and overall could pose a risk to ocean vessels in shipping lanes.
It could still make its way reasonably far north, up towards kind of South Africa, where it can disrupt shipping.
Antarctica always has lots of icebergs, thousands if you count the small ones, but more are being created, and they're melting faster. We have warmed the climate of Antarctica, and now it's answering back, raising sea levels and affecting ocean currents.
It's important to track icebergs in real time. As they melt, they deliver the fresh water into the ocean. That's a freshwater flux into the ocean, then can impact the ocean circulation.
It all points to global warming that is putting Antarctica's ice shelves under stress.
They could potentially melt more quickly, and that will lead to more of these icebergs, but also lead to sea level rise. It's really another sign that we're really changing the climate, and we don't have much time to reverse these things before the impacts become catastrophic.
A23A will probably melt in the next 4 years, but more big icebergs are coming. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
It's so warm in Calgary today, some people hit the links. The city opened 2 golf courses as temperatures reached 15 degrees, but the Chinook winds also fueled this large grass fire near the city of Airdrie. Some residents were briefly forced to flee, but emergency crews say that fire is now under control. The harm of social isolation ahead, how loneliness can affect your health.
Is hiding in those
This Christmas ad for Charlie's Bar in Northern Ireland has really struck a chord with people. It's been viewed more than 10 million times now. It shows an elderly man on his own stopping by the pub for a pint, and thanks to a friendly dog, he strikes up a conversation with some young people. The ad shows how kindness and a simple hello can make such a difference to those who are alone. And that applies everywhere. New data from Canada's National Institute on Aging suggests social isolation and loneliness is a growing problem. 41% of older Canadians reported being socially isolated. 58% say they experienced loneliness in the past year. Doctors say loneliness can have an impact on your health.
This can lead to more mental health concerns. This can lead to more physical stress.
Social isolation and loneliness is as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
It's also linked to serious conditions such as dementia and cardiovascular disease. The report calls for a national strategy on programs that help seniors connect to social activities. And of course, kindness and friendliness from all of us can go a long way too. Christine Sinclair's swan song next. Her teammates reflect on her remarkable career.
Rocking around the Christmas tree at the Christmas party hop.
It's taken 65 years for that song to reach #1. Brenda Lee recorded it in 1968 when she was just 13, and now it's reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 thanks to streaming services. And that makes Lee, now 78, the oldest person to ever top the Billboard chart. Well, it feels like Christine Sinclair has been playing soccer for Canada forever, but the woman who is at the top of her game is about to bow out. She'll play her last game with Team Canada tonight in front of a hometown crowd in Vancouver in a stadium that, for tonight, has been renamed in her honor. Quite the accolade for a player who loves the game, but not the limelight. Neethu Garcha on the mark. Christine Sinclair leaves on soccer.
The world's leading all-time scorer's final practice before her last game has teammates reflecting on how she's impacted them.
My whole journey with the national team has involved her, and I don't know what it's going to look like without her.
little moments that she probably has no idea about have changed a lot of our lives.
Votes of confidence, she says, constantly coming from Sinclair changed the game for younger teammates. They say Sinclair herself is unassuming, humble, and doesn't try to grab the spotlight.
As much as she's changed the world in soccer and changed the country's landscape of soccer, she still wants more for us than she's ever wanted for herself.
For the day, BC Place has been renamed as Christine Sinclair Place. At Sunday's practice, Sinclair said now that she's back in the region where she's making her international farewell, the moment is finally starting to hit her.
I think it's kind of sinking in now that this is it. Just trying to enjoy every moment. And it's actually really enjoyable to play soccer without any stress. It's a nice feeling.
The Olympic gold medalist doesn't look stressed on the field, though. She makes it look easy, teammates say, and has fun.
We have to remember all the countless hours that Sink has been working on and off the pitch, right, that people don't see.
She's got a sense of humor that's hilarious. She keeps us laughing.
Holding an endorsement from her Canadian coach, Sinclair has hinted she wants to get into coaching.
Sink will make an unbelievable coach.
Sinclair has said she plans to continue playing professionally with Portland this season. She's also talked of extended vacations and spending time with family. For now, her 331st international game brings to an end a chapter she started at age 16. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Her star has shone so bright for so long, it is hard to imagine Canadian soccer without Christine Sinclair. She made her debut with the Canadian national team, as Neetu said, at age 16, and she's never looked back. We leave you tonight with some snapshots from her legendary career, Canada's greatest of all time. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.